Okay, you kind of come over here and like lean back on me.
So, hello everyone. This is Larissa, happiness archaeologist and recently certified cuddle party facilitator. And
Yay! Oh, and Cassandra, also a cuddlist. And we're going to talk about resentments and requests and being clear with people.
so I was thinking, like, how can one communicate about, like, okay, let's say you've got a friend visiting for a couple of days and they have perfumes that you're not used to. And it's not that you're like chemically sensitive and it would really like affect your health, but it's just you're not used to it and it's kind of like perturbing you. But it feels like such a small thing. You don't want to bother with it because they're only there a couple of days.
You don't want to be that person who's like, nyeh, 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 and picking at everything.
But meanwhile, you're getting resentful and they're picking up on that and they're wondering what's wrong and nobody's speaking up. Like, what are ways to kindly communicate those preferences so that you can avoid the resentment and like the disconnection energy?
Ooh, I love this question. So the easiest way would be to rewind all the way to the very beginning. And the friend comes in and you do a variation of the opening agreement that we do in Cuddlist sessions. And you know this, the opening agreement goes something like, I agree to speak up or move at any time if I'm uncomfortable and not to just put up with or tolerate things. And so I'm going to take responsibility for my own well-being. And then I ask, will you do the same? And I wait for my client in that situation. But the variation with a friend who's visiting could be something like, hi, I'm so glad you're here. I'm looking forward to this visit. And I found that in order to prevent any kind of resentment, this agreement can be really awesome. So I want to offer this thing. It might be kind of weird. Like you could disclaimer it however you wanted. But while you're here, I agree that I promise you that I'll speak up or change what I need to change so that I'm comfortable with you here, so that I'm not putting up with anything, even something little, because I want to avoid, you could give the example that you just gave, I want to avoid, say your shampoo is kind of irritating to me, but I'm like, oh, that's such a little thing and I don't want to be whiny. But I agree that I'll speak up and be like, hi, I'm noticing that scent's kind of bothering me. And I'd like to be able to do that as a way of practicing setting boundaries and being clear and avoiding resentment. So with a friend who's coming to visit, you'd probably have to give it a little bit more container, like a little bit more of those words around it. In a Cuddlist session, it's pretty good to just be like, hi, I agree that I'm going to speak up or move if I'm uncomfortable at any time for any reason. And the other person's like, yeah, cool, me too. But with a friend visiting, they might be like, what? I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Like you might have to kind of be with their reaction. So what do you think about that?
So what I'm hearing is like the first part of like, hey, I'm noticing like, okay, the scent of your shampoo and here's my reaction to it. I'm feeling kind of like it's bothering me. And I guess I wonder, so if my solution is not to like leave the house, how does a request get made, especially when they're in your domain? Like how might like, hey, like, would you like to try my shampoo instead? Or would you mind putting the bathroom fan on? Like what kinds of ways can you make the preference request that is gentle and kind?
I think either of those could be great, but what I'm hoping that you'll hear is that rewinding before there's any criticism or critique or anything that could be like, oh, you're not being nice. Before any of that, you make the agreement with each other that you both understand that you will speak up. Because then they can speak up too. They're like, yeah, and you snored all night long and I could hear you 3 rooms away and I didn't get a wink of sleep. Like maybe they don't think there's a good solution to that either. If you snore that loudly, you probably have tried some different things already, and they might love their shampoo. But the cool thing is it strengthens the ability to speak up between the two of you, and it decreases the shame that there's something wrong, where it's going to threaten the friendship if you don't like everything about each other. Like it allows you to build a more honest relationship. But it works much better if you set that foundational piece first. I'll speak up or move if I need to, so I'm not tolerating or enduring anything with you. Do you agree to do the same? Just so there's, hi, resentment is easy, especially when you're staying in somebody else's house. Like that's a great example that you brought up, by the way.
Thanks.
Because there are a lot of things that are a lot easier to sort out than that one. That, you know, as the host, you kind of feel or can feel like you have to just make that person welcome. And as the guest, you kind of feel like you're tiptoeing around and you don't want to mess up things with the host. And especially if the friendship is kind of a new one, you're like, well, what's okay and what's not okay. And you don't really know how to speak up to each other yet. And so just that, hey, and maybe even bringing the word shame into it, depending on the friendship, right? But it's like, hey, let's do this shame busting move to increase connection and intimacy between us. And it's kind of counterintuitive. But let's agree that we'll speak up or move if we're uncomfortable, so we don't create resentment.
And I think, like, you know, in a Cuddlist session, there's the time container for it. And I'm thinking, one thing that I've heard of that missionaries from my church do is the companionship inventory. So they have this specified time where they go over, you know, what's working well between them and like what they've observed in each other that is good and what things they might want to bring up like that, like at a set time. So you know it's coming. You're not like, you know, in the middle of watching a movie and suddenly someone's got a thing.
By the way, I hate your shampoo. Yeah.
And so I guess when there's not as much of a time container, do you have any thoughts on like how to grease the wheels of bringing it up so it's not like a shock to the system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. And you could even try something, and I really like that idea. And you could bring it up too, based on, because, you know, of your faith and your experience there. Like, hey, person whose house I'm staying at, I would love to do this companionship practice with you. Could we do it once a day or every other day while I'm here? Because I really would like to practice speaking up and not being resentful. And I'm wondering if you would join me in that practice. Right? That's also like a nice invitation. And if they're like, no, I'm not interested, then, you know, you're a little bit like, okay, cool. How about this agreement that we agree that we'll speak up if we're uncomfortable, and we'll just do it in the moment. And so it could happen in the middle of watching a movie and you're like, did you just fart? You know, it also just depends on the friendship. I'm not, just for those of you who are watching, I'm not advocating in the middle of the movie, did you just fart, being a great way to handle this. I do think, you know, what you're talking about, Larissa, some finesse is helpful, but sometimes we try to do finesse so much that we miss saying anything. And so I'm advocating for make the agreement with each other to be able to be awkward. Like, hi, I have no role modeling for how to do this in a friendship, but it's important to me that we don't get resentful of each other, either direction. So this is the best thing that I've come up with. Do you have any ideas? Like, you could totally do that too, which might be really nice.
And I was even thinking, like, if I want to wait for like this set time, but I'm worried I'm gonna forget, I can either make a note on my phone, because sometimes just that like journaling element can help relieve some of this, oh, I'm feeling annoyed, or put it on a post-it note. And like maybe there could be like a place where these post-it notes live. And so if the person wants to like a suggestion box for the house, then they can read it when they're ready, in a good mood and in a good emotional place to be receiving that information. So I think there are options, but getting them communicated, I think, is preferable to keeping them in, building a resentment and letting the friendship crumble when it didn't need to.
Yeah, resentment is kind of like rust. And, you know, once rust gets into metal, it'll just eat at it until you take some big action. And once it goes too far, you can't really take any big action. Like, it's just eroded. And resentment is kind of like that for relationships. And so rust prevention technique.
Sounds great to me.
Yes.
Any final thoughts on that?
No, I think that's good. Thanks for bringing it up.
Well, thank you so much.